I was watching a video and it reminded me of a couple of weird and creepy little things that have happened in my life. I'm currently 17 and this stuff happened just a week after I turned 10. It was Halloween, my favorite holiday, and I was trick-or-treating with my mom, the usual. Same rich neighborhood, same walking path. We are pulling up to the most decorated house on the street, same house with the crazy decoration every year. They always have people dressed up around the house, and I noticed a guy in a hood. You couldn't see his face or anything other than the hood for that matter, but I didn't think much of it, other than it was scary, at least for 10-year-old standards. We got the candy and left. After a house or two, I noticed the same guy following us. I didn't say much until 3 or so houses later, and he was still following us. I told my mom, and she told me to stay close to her. I didn't feel safe with her protecting me, because the energy she gave off was, "Oh, you're fine, it's not a big deal." After turning 1 or 2 corners, he was still following us. We got into a crowd, and he was still there and getting closer to us. He got so close he could have tapped my mom, and before I knew it, I started running through the crowd. He began to chase me, and I eventually made it out of the crowd by myself. I decided to continue trick-or-treating by the house next to me to not look suspicious, or at least I think that's why I did that. Needless to say, my mom pulled up next to me in the car and yelled at me all the way home. After getting home, I got grounded and disciplined for running away right after. I actually just brought this up to her halfway through typing this. She gave off that "lol, I remember" vibe. To be honest, I actually haven't thought about this story for a while, and now that I think about it, that's probably why I have a constant fear of being followed, but I don't know. So, to the hooded guy who tried to potentially kidnap me, let's never meet again. In the spirit of Halloween, a holiday I don't really celebrate, I wanted to share an experience that happened to me a long time ago. I was probably 5 or 6 when it happened, and it's honestly a hazy memory for the most part. I don't remember much of that day, but I do remember in better detail that Halloween night, when my mom, sister, and I went trick-or-treating with my aunt's family. We reached this amazingly, albeit terrifying, decorated house. My mom, being a horror fanatic, was excited to go visit the house with my aunt and sister. I'm not as big of a fan of horror, so I immediately started to cry as to not go near the house. I was freaking out, so my cousin, around 13 at the time, decided to take me back to the car and wait for everyone to finish up trick-or-treating on that street. We decided to just sit in the back seat of the car while we waited. Next thing I remember was this tall man, probably much taller than he really was given my perspective as a child, standing next to the car. He was wearing a mask and black clothing. I don't remember if it was a Michael Myers mask or just a pale white face. He started tapping the windows, and my cousin pulled me down to the car floor while trying not to panic. The man then bent down and stared at us through the windows while continuously fidgeting with the car doors and placing his hand on the window. He walked around the car and checked all 4 of the doors. Luckily, they were all locked. My cousin started crying, and I obviously followed suit and started bawling as well. Eventually, the man walked away, and within a few minutes my mom and aunt were back with my sister and younger cousins. My older cousin told them about the ordeal, and they were a bit concerned, but decided that it was just some guy being creepy on Halloween. Even if it was just a guy trying to be funny, who would actually think that could possibly be funny? I doubt that was the case, honestly, but I would rather believe that it was just some creep thinking he could scare some kids on Halloween for laughs, rather than think my life was in actual danger had he been able to open one of the doors. I truly despised trick-or-treating since then and never really went out again on Halloween. This incident happened to me last year on Halloween. My little brother and I were home alone since our parents had gone out to a Halloween party. They had tasked us with handing out the candies to trick-or-treaters. This bummed my brother and I out because we had plans to go trick-or-treating with a few friends. Our parents told us that we were too old to still be trick-or-treating and that we could instead invite our friends over to the house and hang out there. My friends declined my invitation to come over because they still wanted to go trick-or-treating. So that left me home alone with my brother, handing out candy. A lot of people stopped by our house, and by 10 p.m. almost all of the candy was gone. My brother and I decided we'd eat the rest. We were sitting on the couch, watching a scary movie, stuffing ourselves with candy, when there was a knock at the door. I stormed off the couch, wondering who the hell could be knocking on our door this late. I assumed that it was just some late-night trick-or-treaters. Even if that was the case, I had turned the porch light and Halloween decorations off, which should have been a dead giveaway that we were out of candy or that we weren't home. So I assumed it was my parents. Being cautious, I looked through the people and saw a suspicious man standing on our front porch. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood over his head, which made it difficult to see his face. The only detail on his face I could spot was that he had a beard and dry, crusty lips. There was no way that this guy was a trick-or-treater, because he wasn't wearing a costume and was far too old to be trick-or-treating alone. His hands were stuffed in the front pocket of his hoodie, and he also looked very thin. Every single red flag went off in my head about this guy. There was no way in hell I was going to open the door. Still looking through the people, I watched as he knocked on the door again. He seemed desperate for us to open the door, and was shaking a bit. It wasn't cold outside, definitely not cold enough for someone to be trembling. He was giving me a bad vibe, and I wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. "We're out of candy," I shouted to him. I watched as a smile spread across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile either. "Are you alone in there?" the man asked, almost in a mocking voice. His voice was raspy and dry. "Should I call the police?" my little brother asked me quietly, gripping his cell phone. The man let out a low grumble and said, "Sounds like you're not alone in there." I continued to watch him through the people. His hands were still wedged tightly in his pocket, and he was still shaking a bit. I began to wonder if he was armed. I decided to take actions and spoke to him in the most intimidating voice I could. "Get the fuck away from my house or I'll call the police," I shouted. His smile faded and he bared his teeth. His teeth were piss yellow, and I concluded that he was probably some homeless crackhead. He had a look of fury plastered on his face. Fortunately, he left without trying to break in, probably because he knew I wasn't fucking around with him. I didn't stop watching him through the people until I saw him completely off of our property. My brother and I breathed a sigh of relief and decided not to call the police. We were a bit paranoid after this and watched TV until our parents came home. We didn't tell them about the man, since he hadn't really tried to harm us. Now, when I think back to this, I wish we had called the police, because maybe we would have been able to prevent a murder. You see, the next day we found out that the elderly woman who lived a few houses down from us had been brutally murdered. Her neighbor had found her lying on her front porch, covered in blood. She had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and neck. My brother and I immediately knew who had done it, and we told the police what we knew. They couldn't do much with the information we had given them, since we hadn't seen many details of his face. They went on the hunt with the man, but never caught him. I blame myself for that poor old lady's murder, because I could have prevented it from happening by calling the police. I think the most disturbing thing of all is the fact that he didn't take anything from the old lady's house. Her house had been left untouched, but he could have gone in and taken what he wanted since her door was wide open. This means that he just wanted to kill. That was his only intention. He didn't want money or jewelry, he only had the urge to murder. So to the creepy crackhead Halloween slasher, let's not meet.